right, check in the microphone. 1, 2. Give myself a little bit more volume. And let's do this thing. All right, that looks good, I think. Camera's kind of at a weird angle. Whatever. There we go. Sweet. So everything seems to be working. All systems look like they're going. Cool. Hello and welcome to another Tuesday office hours, Ableton office hours hangout kind of stream. Those of you who might be watching it in the future at some point, all these get uploaded to the channel. Welcome. We had a very busy week last week where it was our first sample pack song challenge, and that was due last Friday, and it went really well. I'm pretty stoked about it. I had a bunch of really cool entries. You can go back and watch the last stream if you want to check them out. Some really cool songs. Some people sampled me, and that was really exciting. But it was cool to see what everybody did with the different samples for the sample pack. So probably tomorrow I'm going to create sample pack number 2 and then be releasing that on the 1st of July. And then that will be due at the end of July. So if you enjoyed that one, then try it. If you didn't try it before, you should try it this time because it's a lot of fun to have like deadlines in there. And then make a track with those samples and send it to me, and we'll take a listen to it at the end of the month. What's up, Janef? It's been a while. Hopefully you're doing well. Hopefully you're busy doing cool stuff like making music and enjoying your life. Hopefully it's not busy doing stuff that you're not excited about. But welcome back. We missed you. We've been doing a lot of streams since you've been gone. But I was just talking a little bit about the sample pack challenge that we did last month. If you missed it, don't worry about it. We're going to be doing another one next month. I have no idea what kinds of samples I'll be doing. I'll probably do something kind of similar to what I did before with a bunch of drum one-shots and then a bunch of loops and maybe a few other one-shots of a few other different kinds of sounds that I like. They're going to be a little bit more diverse and not as synthy next time. Last time I made it all with my modular hardware, and that was a lot of fun. But I want to like get some horns in there, do some like interesting chord progressions, just get like a bunch of different kinds of sounds, and that way people can kind of pick and choose whatever samples kind of fit their vibe. But that I will hopefully make tomorrow, and then release it on, I think Thursday is the 1st. But as far as what we're doing today, generally with the Tuesday Hangout streams, usually I will just hang out and be making weird noises, doing some sound design. Maybe I might even start making some samples for the sample pack today. And then people are welcome to just pop in the chat, ask questions about anything that they are have questions about related to music production with Ableton Live. It can be really specific, like how does X button work, or just real kind of general stuff. It's pretty open-ended. These are very much kind of determined by what people are interested in talking about in chat. So Janef, if you have any questions, any thoughts, anything you want to mention, let me know. But other than that, I think I'm actually probably going to go ahead and start making some samples for the sample pack, and that way you can kind of see what my process is around doing things like making samples from scratch. And then you can kind of see how I did it myself. So until anybody pops into the chat, I'm going to go ahead and just start making some drum samples. And that way they're license free and anybody can use them in any songs they want. And drum synthesis is just, in general, a really great skill set to have. If you are looking for like the perfect drum sample, sometimes it can be really frustrating to not get exactly the sample you're looking for. So it's nice to be able to just generate and make your own stuff from scratch. So let's pick a key. I think last time we were in G. I'll do F this time. And I gotta turn on this guy, make sure I can hear the sound. And make sure you guys can hear that. Cool. So drum synthesis. I made a video about kick drum synthesis that you can check out if you haven't seen that already. It's mostly like 808 style kick drums, but we're gonna just make a kick drum from scratch. I like using operator, but you can use any synth that you want. And when I'm using operator for drum synthesis, I'm actually not doing any FM synthesis. It just makes it too complicated. So I'm gonna go over here to the routings and just switch it up so that they're all parallel. And that way I have 4 independent oscillators with no FM going on. And we're gonna start with the kick drum. Anytime you're doing some drum synthesis, there's basically like 2 things you need to be thinking about. Or there's 2 things that are happening really in like a drum. There's the impact of like the mallet hitting the drum, which creates this kind of like punchy sound. And then there's the boom of the drum actually vibrating and resonating. And what I like to do is kind of divide and conquer when it comes to drum synthesis. So I'm gonna have one oscillator just be the punch or the impact, and I'm gonna have another oscillator be the boom or the resonance of my kick drum. It's also really helpful to have something like a spectrum analyzer on this, just so we can kind of see what's going on here and kind of see what frequencies we're using. So right now, if I play this F note right here, we can see we're getting this spike in volume as a sine wave right around 100 hertz, which is honestly pretty good. That's kind of like roughly where we want part of the punch of our kick to be. I'm also going to make this kick in key, so I'm going to just be playing an F note, because it'll be an F minor. So I'm just going to keep playing the root note. And all we really need to do here is stick with the sine wave, go to our volume envelope, take the sustain, turn it all the way down, and it gives us a much more kind of like punchy sound. And then we can start adjusting our decay left or right to make it shorter or longer. So if I start turning this down, if I go too small, we don't really get anything. It doesn't really sound like anything. But if I go too long, it's too resonant. So we need to find a sweet spot in here. Turn the volume up on this. Maybe something like that. Yeah, something like that to do for right now. It's totally up to taste, and that's one of the cool things about drum synthesis is that you can do this however you want. You can make it shorter or make it longer. If you change your mind, it's really easy to fix, as opposed to a sample where you oftentimes either have to do a lot of processing with effects or you have to just go find a different sample. So that's going to be part 1 of our kick drum. We're probably going to tweak this a little bit. I might make this a little shorter, but for right now, I think that's fine. We are then going to go over to oscillator B. We're going to make sure this is also a sine wave. And we are going to go over to our coarse frequency, because the boomy resonant part of our kick drum, we want to be a lower frequency. So if I play this note, let me first turn it up. It's also around 100 hertz, which is too much. So I'm going to take the coarse frequency and switch this down to 0.5. And that is going to move it down 1 octave, which should put it right in like the 40 hertz-ish range, which is what we're looking for. So this is going to be our boomy subby part of our kick. And once again, we're going to do the same thing with our volume envelope. We're going to take the sustain, turn it all the way down, and all of a sudden that's going to start sounding a lot more like a kick. I often like to give this part a tiny bit of attack, just like a couple milliseconds. Like that, just to give our punch a little bit more time to be heard. And then of course we can adjust our decay to taste. So if I turn this up, we get these big boomy 808s, which I'll probably make a few of those. Or down here, we can get something that's a little tighter. So if we combine the 2 of those together, we get a kick drum that we can tune by playing different notes. So I'm going to tweak this a little bit. I'm going to start dialing it in a little more. So I'm going to take the decay on the first oscillator. We can also adjust the volumes to get more of one or the other. So I'm going to take oscillator B, take the decay, turn it up a little bit. I want it a little bit more boomy than this. Yeah, that's more kind of what I'm looking for. And then this impact here, and turn this up and then play with it. I kind of like that. I don't mind that. play with it a little more. I think it works okay. Yeah, that'll be fine for right now. And then other than that, I don't really need to do much else here besides start, like, again, keep on tweaking my envelopes to get it just right. Go a little higher here. And I might like toss like some saturator on here to beef this up a little bit. And this really brings out a lot of this layer here. What's up, Emo? How's it going? We're just doing a little bit of drum synthesis for the sample pack, for next month's sample pack, that I have literally just started working on, and just by making a little kick drum. So that sounds pretty decent to me. I don't mind that at all. So what I'm going to do here for the sake of the sample pack is I don't want to just give people just one kick. I want them to give maybe a couple different versions of a kick, and that way they can kind of pick and choose whichever one they think fits their own style or fits their needs kind of the best. But I like this as like a starting point. So I'm going to go ahead and just toss in a MIDI note. It should be F1. And just take a listen to it. Got to make our note a little longer. I'll just make it the whole note. Cool. So this is going to be kick number 1. I'll go ahead and rename this. And I'm going to duplicate it first. And then because I'm lazy, I'm just going to freeze and flatten it. So here is our first kick sample. It's going to sound like that. And then when I actually edit this together for the sample pack, I'll just pick one of these, and I'll just, actually I can just do it now. I can just crop this guy. Oops. Let's try that again. Why are you not cropping? There we go. So now we have first kick. That's going in the sample pack. Now for kick number 2, maybe we'll make something a little bit tighter, so maybe not quite as boomy. So we're going to go in here and play with the decay a little bit. Like that. Feels a little tighter. We can maybe also give it more punch. Maybe not that much. There's pretty good. You can also play around sometimes with like switching these up to like triangle waves to make them sound a little more distorted. But I think for this situation, we're going to keep it the way it is. Get this kind of like more distorted sounding kick. I think that's pretty good. Anything else I would put on here? Maybe a little bit more distortion. Nah. We're going to make our lives easier. So once again, we're going to duplicate this guy. And we are going to freeze it, flatten it, and then move our start marker over here, crop it, and then here's kick number 2. So I'll probably make like 3 kicks, 3 snares, 3 hi-hats, kind of similar to what I did last time. So on this one, I want to bring back up the decay here. And I want to do a more kind of distorted one. So we could like crank this through the saturator if we want. See what happens. If we want to go for that kind of thing. We could even experiment with some other distortion, like a tiny bit of overdrive. Let's see if that works. Pretty extreme, but part of the thing you're doing when you're making a sample pack is just trying to get diversity, just trying to like, you don't know who the end user is, you don't know what kind of thing they want, so they might be into this kind of thing. We could definitely go a lot harder than this if we want. We could go like, but that's like a totally different thing. So Let's stick with this, and this will be kick number 3. Nice. I have not tried the Sandman delay yet. Yeah, Plugin Alliance is great for stuff like that. I love it when like Plugin Boutique or whoever like has their like super huge sales, and you're like, oh, this $100 plugin is available for $5. I'm definitely gonna grab that. Cool. So this is actually a fairly different methodology for making a sample pack than I did last time, but this actually I think works for me. Cool. So here's our 3 kicks. We'll leave them there for right now, but we'll come back to them at some point. And let's do a snare. So synthesizing snares can be a little bit weird because there's so many different shapes and sizes of snares, and they can be kind of tricky. Let me go ahead and save this too, just in case. Put it in a different folder. Get rid of those guys. All right, so synthesizing snares, there's a million different ways to do it. We're gonna do the more kind of like traditional 808s that'll do it first, but again, we're gonna do a couple different variations with different effects and different things on them just to kind of see what happens. So when it comes to the impact of the snare, we can either do a noise oscillator or a sine oscillator. The more kind of traditional way to do it is with a sine, and it's gonna be a very similar method to what we did with the snare drum, except for do something like that. And this can actually be really tight just to give it that little thing, a little like really quick sound, but we're gonna go right around here. That's all we're gonna do for our impact, at least for right now. And then our oscillator B is going to be our resonance of our snare, which is generally gonna be a noise oscillator. There are 2 noise oscillators in Operator. There's the sample looped and the sample white. There's a difference between these 2. Sample looped is a sample of a noise waveform, which means that as you play higher and lower pitches, it's going to change the pitch. Let me turn the volume up. That would help. And you can actually hear it looping, especially if you play it really fast. So you could make a snare drum using this waveform, the noise loops, but the white noise is just going to be way easier. The white noise is just fixed frequency, enough to say frequency. It's just pure white noise, so it's just going to be the same. Doesn't matter what MIDI note you play. So I'm going to start with white noise. Same thing over here. Take our sustain, turn it all the way down. And that's what's going to create our impact of our snare. Or not the impact, the resonance of our snare. So to combine the 2 together, we get most of our snare. We're going to adjust our decay to taste. We can play different notes. So I like something in that octave, and then we can make a really tight snare. Or a much more resonant snare. We'll start with something like that. And I might turn this down depending on how other things go. So from here, we're going to start with some reverb. And I'm gonna play with the hybrid reverb because I have not spent enough time using hybrid reverb for snares specifically. So I'm not sure what are gonna be the best settings off the top of my head, but we're gonna play around with it and see what happens. It's obviously way too much. So we're gonna try and turn the dry wet way down. Turn the decay way down. Try a few different places. We'll try some drum ones. I don't mind that so much. Actually sounds pretty decent. Maybe a little bit less decay over here. A little bit less volume on that. And then less decay on this guy. And I think a tiny bit less decay over here. So this is one of the cool things about drum synthesis, is that you can like make all these little tiny micro details and edits to get your snare or whatever sound you're trying to make exactly the way you want. So I kind of like that. I think that's working, at least for version number 1 of this, and then we can duplicate it and make a few variations on it. Also, I can see that there are a few people watching now, which is great. Welcome. If you have any questions about making music with Ableton Live, feel free to toss those in the chat. The whole point of the stream is not just me talking about what I'm doing, but you guys are welcome to participate and ask me about anything that you think would be interesting for me to go about. But for right now, we're just making samples for the sample pack. What's up, IG17? So project exported as a wave. It's on 48, but on the master, I'll export to 44.24 dimension is the master project. So when it comes to sample rates, it looks like you are exporting on 48, but when you're mastering, you're going down to 24. Not really. So if you are working at 44.1 when you're producing or mixing or whatever, and then you export at 48K, that doesn't do anything beneficial to you. You can't go from a lower quality to a higher quality. But if you are producing and mixing at 48K, and then the final version is going down to 44.1, it will change the audio quality, but by a tiny bit, like not really enough for you to notice it. Like the difference between 44.1 and 48K is like super, super marginally different. They're basically the same in terms of audio quality. But in terms of like compatibility and like any weird things like that, I would say, export your mix at whatever sample rate you're working with. So if you're recording samples at 48K and you are, working with stuff at 48K, export at 48K, that's totally fine. And then when you master it, you can export it at 44.1 and it shouldn't really change anything there. I think that answers your question, hopefully. Hopefully that makes sense. The way you phrased it, I just want to make sure I'm getting it right. But yeah, so for like example, if you are, here, your output quality is set to 48K. You don't need to change this to 44.1 before bouncing it out at 44.1. This is just going to be whatever you're hearing coming through your speakers whenever you're playing stuff through live. And then when you export, you can set your export to be whatever you want it to be. And they do not need to be the same thing. So hopefully that answers your question. All right, so here we're going to be playing a little F1 note. I feel like I'm going to make this snare a little better. Yeah, 48K is specifically for audio that you're syncing to video, because generally, or at least in the past, the frame rate for video was 24 frames per second. So 48,000 samples per second and 24 frames per second lines up nicely. However, you can still sync 44.1 music to video, and it's still fine. But yeah, I wouldn't stress too much about the like audio quality difference between 44.1 and 48K. I know a lot of people who just like working at 48K for some reason. Sweet. So we got a little snare here. It's sounding okay. It's definitely needs to be compressed though. So we're gonna toss this through a compressor real quick. I'm not gonna overly compress it. I think one of the things you want to be thinking about when you're making samples for other people to use is you want them to have some room to work with their own effects. So I'm gonna put a decent amount of compression, but I'm not gonna like crank it through here like I might normally if I was actually working with this, because again, this is going out to people and I'm not sure, they might not want a super compressed snare. And if they want a super compressed snare, they can just do it themselves. So we're going to turn the threshold down a little bit, give ourselves a little bit of attack. Sound a little better. And still not sure about the decay time. And also a little bit less reverb. What's up, Van? Welcome. We're just doing a little bit of drum synthesis right now for the next sample pack. Maybe a little bit of volume here too. And a little bit less here. All right, I think that's gonna be fine for the first one. Yeah, Jeff, we can definitely toss some drum bus on here. So normally I wouldn't necessarily put drum bus on something like this where it's just one thing at a time. The nice thing about drum bus is it's kind of designed that you can run all of your drums through it at the same time. So you run your kick through it, you run your snare, you run it, the hi-hats, your percussion all through one place. And it's basically like 3 or 4 effects kind of all built into one. We have a little bit of distortion right here. So this is basically like a little saturator, kind of like a super stripped down saturator that also has a built-in compressor, which is kind of nice. Then we have like a way to kind of like boost or get rid of certain frequencies, as well as a transient control, which is really cool. This is one of the only places in live where you get transient controls. And you get the boom knob, which is one of my favorite knobs in all live. It basically turns everything into an 808, which we probably won't do for the snare, but just to say you can hear what it sounds like. It just adds in a low frequency, which is really nice. If you have like a nice generic sounding, nice kind of punchy kick, but doesn't have enough low end, toss it on there and makes it sound great. So IG-17, my favorite shortcuts, probably one of my favorite ones of all time is if you have a drum rack that has a sample on it. This is like my favorite like secret key command. If you hold down Command, or on PC, I think it's Control, but it might be Alt. I could be wrong. If you hold on Command and you drag one sample on top of another, it layers the two of them together. And that just is a lifesaver when building drum racks. So that's one of my favorite key commands. And then a lot of the classics like, Command D for duplicate, all that kind of stuff. Any other like really cool key commands? Duplicate time and paste time are also really nice. So if you have stuff in the arrangement view, you can duplicate that entire area. So Shift Command D does that, or Shift Control D. I feel like there's like 2 other really good key commands that are my favorites that I love teaching people about, but I can't remember them off the top of my head. I honestly don't know if the drum bus is modeled off of anything specific. Off the top of my head, I don't think it is. I could be wrong. I think they mostly like grabbed a lot of stuff from like the saturator, for example. Like I'm pretty sure this is based off of the saturation modes that you get inside of a lot of the different filters inside of Live, or just like soft, medium, hard are your only options, and then you get a drive control. But I could be wrong about that. I have not looked into it. So on something like this snare here, the crunch, damp, and drive and compressor controls are probably the ones I would focus on the most. So we turn this up. You obviously hear it getting louder and just a little bit more saturated if you turn it way up. It's not quite as like big and over the top on something like this, but it's a nice way to kind of just like make your drums feel a little bit more kind of rich and full. And then the crunch control is going to like help emphasize the mids, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a while since I used that. So you can really hear it kind of like bring out a lot of those mid controls. Let me turn the reverb off so we can hear it without it. And really kind of like sharpens those mids. which actually I think sounds really good here. I might even toss this before the reverb and then turn the reverb way down. Yeah, that's actually working for me between these two. And then the damp is going to help kind of like de-emphasize some of wherever this frequency is. So it's kind of like a high shelfish kind of filter, where you can like still hear those highs, but they're kind of just kind of de-emphasized. Is there a way to custom key map upset? All right. So there are ways to do custom key maps, but not in the way that you're asking. So you're trying to hit Command R and then Shift 3 to rename a track and put the number at the beginning. And have it, you want it to automatically put in the number in there. Again, I don't think there's going to be a way to do that off the top of your head. I mean, there's obviously, you know, Command K for key mapping and just making your own kind of custom key commands that way. The other option would be there are, you know, software programs out there where you can like generate your own key commands. And then, but inside of Live, like you could have one key that does multiple things. So you hit like Shift, Command, and then some key, and then it does like a series of key commands for you in a row. That would be kind of the other way to do it. But yeah, being able to like have multiple key commands with one key command, I think you'd need like a separate software running to do something kind of like that. So yeah, so going back to our snare here, I think it's sounding okay. Let's turn the reverb back on and then turn it way down. It's mostly the convolution. I want the convolution to be way less. I don't have a good suggestion for those kind of softwares because I've not tried doing something like that. But I know some people who have in the past. I could look into it and see what they've been doing for it. I think there's just like different kind of like key command automation software out there that does stuff like that. So IG17 was asking about sometimes he feels that his kicks play in different keys, the same sample, and it's not constant inside something like a simpler. So when you are working with something like a kick in simpler, I want to make sure I understand your question. Yep. Let's grab this guy and toss it in here. Actually, we'll do the other one. So if you have a kick in here, the root note of simpler is a C3 note. So when I wrote this kick, it was an F note. So this is an F sample kick. And if we toss the tuner on here, but that means when I play the F note, we're not necessarily going to get an F note. Play the wrong one, but so the middle C note, C3, is going to be the original recorded pitch of this sample. So you want to make sure that you're playing a C note, and then it will actually output. I keep on missing it, playing the wrong note. It's actually going to output the original note. So this was recorded at F, so I'm playing a C note, but it's outputting an F note. So it's something you need to watch out for. So if you actually want to be able to tune it and be able to play different notes and have it stay in key, is just go to the controls here and go to the transpose. And that way, again, we'll be playing a C note, and I can just pitch this down a couple semitones until I get to C, And now when I play this, it's actually playing the key that responds to the note that I'm playing. So I'm not sure if that's the issue you're running into, where the keys and the notes you're playing are not matching up, but it has to do with the root note of simpler. And then you can kind of change it, and then that way you make sure it's playing right. The other situation you might be running into is if there's a pitch bend built into your kick. And this is pretty common for a lot, especially like big 808 style kicks, is they'll kind of change pitch over time, which helps kind of emphasize the impact. So we go in here, we got a pitch envelope, we can actually kind of create this situation. Let's make it a little more subtle. Where it's like starting at one note and then it's kind of ending on the C. So you need to watch out for that and see if it if there's a built-in pitch bend, then it will change over time, and that's just part of what it is. The important part of that, if you are noticing it kind of changing over time, is where does it end? Where does it land on? And that'll be basically like the pitch of that kick. So if you have a little pitch bend in there, or a pitch envelope, that's totally fine. And that's a pretty common thing that happens in a lot of kicks, is it's just that's built into the sample. That's actually something else we could do for a different kick too. But I think hopefully that's what you're asking about. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, so we got, it's gonna be the first version of our snare here. And we're going to first duplicate it. Yeah, if you have an F sample and you draw 4 MIDI notes and the first 3 all play F and the last one plays E, then that's weird. That shouldn't be happening like that. I'm trying to think of like what would cause that. They're all just the exact same MIDI note in a clip. Trying to think of like what would cause that. Not really sure. Yeah, I mean, it could be that like if you have one kick, the tail of one going into the other, that could do some weird stuff with your timing or with your pitch. If that does happen, when you're using your simpler, make sure you're in one-shot mode. And one-shot mode is automatically monophonic. And that way, if one happens and then another one happens right after, they won't overlap and it'll just be the most recent one. If you're in classic mode, they will overlap each other and potentially cause weird stuff. But I don't think that would like cause it to change a whole semitone necessarily. But yeah, try putting in one-shot mode and see if that helps you out at all. All right, so we're gonna freeze this guy, flatten him out, crop it. Yeah, if the MIDI note is staying the same, then it should be the same note every single time. All right, and then we got another snare here. So let's make this one a little bit more kind of noisy. Nope, not that noisy. Maybe a little crunchier here. We can maybe also make this a little longer. See how that compares to the other one. Definitely different. What happens if we pitch up or down? I kind of like that. That seems different enough to me. Once again, we will freeze it, flatten it, crop it. Yeah, some automation weirdness could potentially be part of it. Not sure. All right, for the last snare, let's get creative with it. one of the things I've been noticing I like to do for the sample packs is make 2 kind of normal samples and then make 1 kind of weird one in case people want to do something strange. So let's put some overdrive on this. Yeah. So, what, like, all right, audio should be back up. Cool. Yeah, sorry about that. Thomas was asking about editing audio and specifically slicing samples. So there are a million different ways to do this. Let me show you 3 of my favorite ways to do it. So for example, if we have like a drum loop, I'm assuming that might be the kind of thing you might want to slice up. Let me find something that sounds cool. Cool, we'll take something like that. So we can take a drum loop like this and toss it in the simpler instrument and go down to the slice mode right here. So in slice mode, instead of being able to play the whole sample, so in one-shot mode, I hit a button and it plays the whole sample. Just too long. You get the idea. Or in classic mode, I hold it down, I play it, let go, it stops. So it just plays the sample. But in slice mode, each MIDI note becomes a different slice. So now as I play this, I have all my different slices there, which means as I'm writing my MIDI, I can just start plugging in different slices and it will just play those slices like that. We can slice it up in a lot of different ways. It's going to automatically slice it based off of the transient markers. As you can see, each time there's a transient, it's going to add a slice. And we can adjust the sensitivity here too. So as I turn this down, we'll get less slices, which means longer slices. So yeah, really handy, really easy to do. You can also slice it up either by an increment of the grid. So you can set it to be like quarter notes, or every 8th note is going to be a new slice, which is pretty handy. Or you can even manually do it. So you can like add in your own slices. You can also move any of the slices anytime you want. So you can also manually move them just by clicking and dragging around. So that's one way to slice up a clip. Really fun. And then you just plug in, if you have a MIDI controller or like push or something, you can just start jamming out with it, and it's really easy. Kind of similar to a lot of like kind of like old school samplers. So that's one method. Another method, I'm gonna get a different one. I'm trying to find a beat that has a little more variety to it. These all are boring. Cool, that's at least a little bit more different. So another method to do this is if you have an audio clip, you can just right click on it and hit slice to new MIDI track. So this basically will take this sample and it's going to automatically slice it on the transient. So each time there's one of these triangles, it's going to like create a new slice. Let me finish my train of thought here before I read your next question. Each one of these is going to be a slice, and it's going to put it in a drum rack on a separate track. including a MIDI clip to go with it that has all the slices. So here's what it sounds like originally. Have a weird sample. Slice new MIDI track. Oops, wrong one. Slice new MIDI track. And it creates an entirely new MIDI track. And here's what the MIDI clip looks like. So here's all the slices. And if we go in here, it's a drum rack, and each slice is a separate note on the drum rack. So that's method number 2 for slicing. And then the third method for slicing stuff involves using the arrangement view. So if we are, oops, that's a MIDI clip. Over here in the arrangement view, and I want to start slicing samples and moving things around. Everything right now is kind of like based around the grid. So if I want to say take this and move it around, I can just click and drag and move it around. And if I zoom in, we can change our grid size. Say I want like this sample to go over here. I do this a lot for more kind of like glitchy edits where I want things to be like kind of moving around. You can use like cut, copy, paste. You can use Command D for duplicate. So you can make little edits that way. You can take something like this and you can just hit the R button to reverse it. I'll do something kind of similar over here. Duplicate that around. Maybe duplicate this around. Maybe I'll take this guy. Option drag is the same thing as copying and pasting. So take that there, R button to reverse it. So really pretty cool. And this is how, if I'm doing more kind of like detail-oriented, glitchy kind of slicing and chopping, this is my favorite way to do it. But simple works great. Slice to new MIDI also works great. All right, let me catch up with chat. Thomas, hopefully that answers your question. So application 2 was piano recording, and I wanted to remove some of the notes in the middle of the audio clip. Eventually took the sample arrangement, cut it, consolidated. Yeah, so kind of do what I did here. Just being able to like take individual notes or slices and move them around is probably the most efficient way if you're doing a lot of like detail-oriented sample slicing and moving around. Is there a way to avoid working in the grid? What's up, Felipe? Felipe? Yeah, so just hit Command 4 and that turns your grid off. So now as you move this around, it's just the grid is off. You can also just right click and then turn the grid off down here. Then you hit Command 4 and turns it back on, or Control 4 if you're on a PC. On top of that, if you move things around and you hold down the, did they change the key command for this? Hold down the command key. I think it used to be different. Hold down the command key and it will move it not snapping to the grid, and you let go and then it will snap back to the grid. But Command 4 turns off your grid in the arrangement view if you're in the arrangement view. And if you have a clip in here, Command 4 also turns off the grid. You can still see the grid in the background, but when you move things around, it doesn't snap it to the grid. So Van, convert to MIDI is a little different than slice to MIDI in terms of its functionality. So slice to new MIDI track is if you like the sound, you like the samples in there, like the drum sounds, but you want to change the rhythm, like you want to just change the order of them. Converting drums to new MIDI track is better if you like the rhythm, but you want to put new sounds in there. So slightly different kind of like applications in terms of when and where you use them. Can you get a very short explanation or short demo of what Max for Live is? Ooh, all right. That's a long question. Let me catch up with chat, Thomas, and then we can talk about Max for Live, because that's a whole rabbit hole to dive into. Get the option, but I guess that's something more about sequencing. Yeah, I'm not quite sure what you mean then. If you're like, you're looking for a way to just be able to, yeah, I'm not really sure what you mean by that, by sequencing off of the grid. Like, do you want things to automatically be sequenced, like not using the grid? I guess maybe what I'm thinking about is using something like Swing, where you are taking things and purposely moving them off the grid, as opposed to just not having a grid, but it'll like actually move things off of the grid in specific ways. If so, we can definitely talk about Swing if that's what you mean. But other than that, I'm trying to understand a situation where getting off of the grid without just turning the grid off, like how those are different. Yeah, so Van, unfortunately, you can't really move around. You can't really move around audio in a clip like this. So oftentimes, if I need to do something like that, I'll just copy and paste it over to the arrangement view, and then do the edits I want to make, and then Command J to consolidate it into one, and then just copy and paste it back. And that's how I'll do edits like that. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the kind of like basics of what Max for Live is. So Max is a programming language that basically it's a standalone thing. Yeah, you can't really edit it in there, Van. So Max stands on its own, and it's been actually around since the 80s. And actually, cool, like fun fact, piece of trivia: the very first versions of Ableton Live were built as a Max patch. So before Live was what it is now, it was a Max patch first. And so it's been for a long time, and Max is specifically really good at doing different kinds of like data manipulation. So a lot of times, like data scientists will use it to take like big, huge amounts of data and like turn it into different things. But an audio signal and a video signal are also considered data. So it's really good at manipulating those things. So back in around Live 8, Ableton partnered with Cycling74, the company that owns Max, and made Max for Live, which allows you to do Max programming inside of Live. So what this means is essentially you can build your own plugins, your own audio effects, your own synthesizers, your own whatever you want from scratch using this coding language. There is a bit of a learning curve to it. You kind of have to like practice a bit to kind of understand how it works before you can really make anything. But if you know a little bit of coding, you can make literally anything you want. So anytime that there is a gap in the features of Live, there's like a thing that you really wish existed and it doesn't exist, odds are somebody else has already made a Max patch for it. So for example, in a video I just made, released yesterday, I wanted to be able to automate between different variations in an audio rack, and there's no way to do that right now. So somebody made a Max patch that does exactly that. So the other really cool thing about Max is that it's all open source and is generally pretty free for any other Max patches. So if somebody makes a cool Max patch, they will release it out there, and you can just download it and try it out for yourself. So for example, there are a few Max patches that are just built into Live now. For example, the LFO audio effect. We toss this on here. This is just an LFO you can put anywhere you want, which is really cool. And you know it's a Max patch if it has this little button right here. So if you hit this, it will open Max in a separate window. Once this loads, hopefully, eventually. Cool, here it is. So here is what Max looks like if you were to code inside of Max. And if I hit this button here, it takes me out of presentation mode, and we can actually look under the hood and see that this is how this patch was coded. And it's all coded using these objects. So like this is an object, And these are all different objects, and you can go in here and I can edit this, and I can move it around. I can add in my own things. I can do whatever I want to it. So if you want to dive into it, this is kind of what max coding looks like underneath the hood. It's a little bit intimidating to get into at first, but if you're into coding and you're into nerdy stuff like that, really, really cool. If you don't want to do any coding, you don't have to. Yeah, so if you accidentally hit that button, it opens up here and you're like, what is all this stuff? You don't want to do any coding? You don't have to. You can just use the patch itself. Like, here's the patch. I don't need to do any coding. It just does something really cool, and then I can use it. So check out maxforlive.com. It's a website where you can download like thousands of free Max devices, and there's weird synthesizers people make with it. You can do cool like video editing stuff with it. Literally anything you want. So yeah, if you have a degree in signal processing, Max is going to be your jam. Really, really handy. If you want to dive more deep into it, if you have more kind of like specific questions about it, let me know. But that's really kind of like the tip of the iceberg in terms of what Max is and what it can do. So go to your Max for Live folder. You can see there's like audio effects and MIDI effects and instruments. You can check them out. Also, there's a lot of really cool ones that come in the live packs. So if you haven't gone to your live packs folder and go in here and like the M4L Big 3, the Granulator, Max for Live Essentials pack. These all have really cool Max for Live devices, as well as things like the Probability pack by Sonic Faction. These are a bunch of really cool Max for Live devices that people have made. But yeah, that's hopefully kind of lets you know at least kind of roughly what's going on there. What's up, Mr. Beast? It's been a while. How are you doing? I need a bigger font for chat. It's getting very hard for me to read all of it. All right, so IG was asking about reverbs and delays and group processing versus return tracks versus insert effects, which is a great question. Let me catch up with chat and we'll get into that. All right, sounds like a lot of people got different opinions about where to put their reverbs and things like that. All right, so reverbs as insert effects versus group effects versus return effects. I think really what it comes down to is what are you doing with the reverb and how important are your transients more than anything else. If your transients are not very important, so for example, in sounds like pad sounds, like really kind of slow, evolving, lush kind of sounds, things that don't have, again, very clear transients, toss the reverb as an insert effect. Just toss it on the track. That's fine. It's not a big deal. However, something like a snare, this one sounds terrible now. Something like that. If you put a reverb on here and you want to say have a lot of reverb on here, as I turn the wet signal up, we lose volume. You can actually see the volume up here for our snare, up around 0 dB. But as I turn this up, you can see we're down to like negative 12 dB. And something like the transient on a snare is actually very, very important. So if you want to maintain the transient, but also have a decent amount of reverb on there, you can just use the return track. Because on a delay and a reverb, the dry wets work kind of like a seesaw, where your dry signal is here and your wet signal is here. As the wet signal goes up, the dry signal goes down. So they go back and forth like that. Whereas if you use a reverb on a return track, the dry signal is here, the wet signal is here on your return track, and then dry signal stays here, and wet signal goes up and down to be whatever you want. Meaning you don't lose any volume, you don't lose any transients, you don't lose any of that kind of stuff. So if it's something percussive, something that has really clear transients, oftentimes things like vocals or like a plucked kind of sound, I pretty much always recommend using the reverb on a return track. If it's something that's really kind of atmospheric, it doesn't matter. It's not really going to make a huge difference. As far as using reverbs as an insert effect versus using them on a group, functionally it's going to be basically the same thing in terms of what it does to your audio. If you have like a vocal group that has like 6 or 7 different vocal layers, and instead of having a reverb on each one, just put the reverb on the group instead of putting it on each one individually. But in terms of what it's going to do to your volumes and your transients, it's going to work the exact same way as if it was actually on the track itself. So that's kind of my thoughts. Hopefully that makes sense. I think it just kind of echoes a lot of what chat was saying as well. Yeah, max coding is super fun. If you guys want, we can do like a whole max coding stream. Because that's something, I'm not like the world's greatest max coder. There's probably plenty of people on YouTube who are a lot better than me. But I can show you guys some basics if that's the kind of thing you guys are into. Yeah, Janef, just by that I meant like if you had a group with like, you know, these 3 tracks, putting the reverb on the group here instead of putting it on each one of these individually. That's kind of what I meant by that. Another thing that I'll actually often do is use these send knobs on a group. So again, these are all my vocal layers, and I wanted to like maintain the transient. Turn up the send on the group itself, and that way you have all the signal going through your group, going through your reverb on a return track. That's a great way to do it. Cool. Yeah, maybe not for this stream, but maybe next Tuesday. Yeah, I don't know. It's weird like planning out streams. We can do a little like max coding, or if people don't have any other questions and we just want to like dive into that, we can totally do that. Because we have like about an hour. We can do a little max coding. Anybody else got any other suggestions, topics they want to go over? Because if not, well, I guess we'll just do it right now. Get rid of these guys. Nice. It's cool we getting people from all over the world in here. This is great. Yeah, but Thomas, next time you're in here, just let me know and we'll do some like max 101 kind of stuff. Well, I guess if you want to do it right now. Oh, sick, Mr. Starbeast. Let me know what that is because people have been asking me about that and I have not figured it out yet. Oh yeah, you can also do the little trick if you want to have like a pseudo insert effect or a pseudo return effect on a track itself, where you group the reverb. This might be what Janeff's talking about. Create an empty chain, and then you can use this as basically your dry chain, and then this is going to be your 100% wet, and then you use this to control the volume. And that's a great way to have like a insert style effect actually on the track itself. If that makes sense, hopefully. So this is 100% dry, and this is 100% wet. And then you just use the volume to control the amount of effect you want in there. Yeah, that's a great way to do it too. Although, honestly, if I'm going to be doing something like this, it's almost easier just to use the send knob. Yeah, and then you sidechain the wet signal. Oh, that's awesome, Mr. Starbeast. Recorder Visi. Sick. That's great news. That's going to be way easier than what I was doing. Interesting email. I generally don't sidechain the wet to the dry, but I'll have to try that out. I'll have to see. I do a lot of sidechaining on my reverbs and things like that through other means, but I'll have to try sidechaining the wet to the dry side. It's interesting. All right, well, let's go ahead and talk about some max coding. So if you're not into max coding, this might be very boring for you, but if you have ever been curious about max coding and how to get started, we'll just go for it. All right, so you can just do this by just opening up just an empty max audio effect or max instrument or max MIDI effect. It doesn't really matter. They're all basically the same thing. But that will, and then hit the little button that opens up your max coding window, and it'll look something kind of like this. And inside this, we have two objects. We have a plug-in object and a plug-out object. So an object is basically anything in Max. And there are a million different kinds of objects. Some are visual, some are just words. They all do specific things. So a big part of understanding Max is the vocabulary of understanding which is the object to do the thing you want it to do. So this plug-in tilde is just going to receive audio from live. And then you can see at the bottom, there's two outputs. And if you mouse over it, it tells you what that output does. So this is the output for channel 1. This is the output for channel 2. And it connects down here to the plug out object. The inputs are going to be at the top. And this is like one of the basic things of max coding that makes it really easy to learn, or kind of easy to learn. Outputs are at the bottom, inputs are at the top, and you just connect things together. And one of the cool things about working with Max is you can code and do things while audio or while a signal is being run through it. So, for example, let's put this on an audio track and just grab a loop of something. Fine, we'll just take this. We got a little piano guy running through here. Open this up. And so if I take this cable that's connecting the two of these together, yeah, this is kind of annoying, and I were to delete one of these cables, it's only going to be coming through one side. And if I want to reconnect them, I just click and drag, and it connects them together. I'm pretty sure YouTube should be in stereo, so hopefully you heard it only going to one speaker and then the other. But that's the basic idea. And we can click, drag, move them around, and we can do whatever we want. These are just notes here. These are just comments objects, so you can like delete those and get rid of them. So if we want to make a new object, we can either hit the N button. You just hit the letter N. It creates an empty object, and it's going to allow you to just search for objects. So if I wanted, for example, an object that was related to live, I could type in the word live, and anything related to live will show up here. So these are all the objects that have something to do with live. And it also gives you a brief description about what it does. So like the live.dial is going to be a little object that looks like this. This looks like a little dial from live. We can also zoom in here so we make this a little easier for you guys to see. So it looks like one of the dials in live, and you can see, unlike these objects, which are just a word, this is actually has like a interface part to it. So if you want a new object and you're not sure what you want, type in N and just start searching and see what shows up. On top of that, we can also go up here and we can make like a comment object where you can just type in your comments. Or we can go here and like, here's a toggle. Here's a bunch of different kinds of buttons. There's even like switches. And again, some of these have like a visual part to them. Some of them don't. Different kinds of objects there. We have numbers. So we either have just integers, floating point, or a single signal. So you open this up, and then here we have just a box that displays a number. Cool. Yeah, right now I'm just going to go over kind of the basics. We have different kinds of sliders. We have like a little piano guy. We have like fader things we can drop them down. We have different dials, all kinds of, again, different visual things that we can toss in here. Here's a bunch of Max for Live ones. So these ones, again, all kind of relate to live. So here's like a volume control kind of thing, that kind of stuff. And then here we got a bunch more. And I'm not going to go through all these, but you get the idea. This is very, very few of them compared to how many there are. There are literally thousands of objects, and they all do very different things. So let's say we want to get this live.gain involved with what's going on. What we're going to do is I'm going to get rid of these guys, these little comments, because we don't need them. And I'm going to move this down here, and I'm going to delete the connectors and put this guy in between. So Janef, we'll see in a moment. So for example, like this live.gain is a volume control. It looks like a volume control. That's what it does. So if we want this to affect our signal coming from live, we're going to take the outputs of our plugin, which is receiving the audio from live, and we're going to connect it here. And if we mouse over this, we can see this is the audio signal on channel 1, and here's the audio signal on channel 2. So if I hit play in live, we can see that this is now receiving audio from live. Now, if we take a look at the bottom here, the live.gain, there are actually 5 outputs here. So we hit the mouse over these, and you can see this is the output for channel 1. This is the output for channel 2. This is going to be the parameter value from -70 to 6. This is going to be the raw parameter value. And this is going to be the amplitude of every channel. So this is actually a pretty common thing that you'll notice. When you have outputs or inputs, the more important inputs and outputs are over on the left side. So these are the important ones, and these are just other ones that are like you might use, but probably not. So now we're going to connect this here and connect this here. And now we have a volume control. If you try moving this around to try to change the volume, it doesn't let you do it. It's going to move the object itself. So if you would like to lock it in place so you can change this, you can command click into empty space or hit the lock button right here. So if I hit command click, it locks everything in place, and now I can actually use this as a volume control to control my signal. Yeah, pretty straightforward. It's about as basic as it gets. So again, we can command click, and that will unlock it. That's kind of the basics here. You're going to be adding in objects that do specific things, and then connecting those objects with little cables to connect them together to, again, create some kind of like signal flow or changing of data or information, which is pretty handy. So just as like another example of something we can do, say we want a number. Say we want to do some math. That's like a pretty common thing you might want to do when coding. We can go up here into the numbers, and we can, again, grab an integer, floating point, which means a decimal point, or a number as a signal. I'm just going to grab an integer. You can also just click in empty space and hit the I button for integer, and that creates a box with numbers. So say I want to take this number and multiply it by this number. I'm going to type in n for new, and I'm going to hit Shift 8 to create the multiply symbol. Here's the multiply two numbers. Boom, there's my multiply object. So we're going to take the output of this one, put it right here, and the output of this one, put it right here. And then we need to make a, so you can't drop full live plugins in here, but there are some, it's actually kind of cool. So there are a lot of just Max for Live devices that are in the core library, like this LFO, for example. This is one of my favorite things about Max. Is I can open up this LFO, and I can take a look inside. So say I want to copy this. I can copy all of this from this patch and then just paste it in my own patch. So you can Frankenstein together patches from other people's patches, which is really cool. But you can't take something like a live compressor because all of the devices in live are coded in C++. They're not coded in Max. However, I know for a fact that when the programmers at Ableton are prototyping new ideas, they will code it first in Max, and then if they'll try it out, see if the company likes it, and then they will then later code it in C++. So they do most, if not all, of their prototyping in Max. All right, so we got a number here, we got a number here. We're multiplying them together. We need to output that into another integer. So I'm gonna type in I, there's my third integer, and I'm gonna connect the output here. So this is how a lot of Max coding goes. Everything kind of goes top to bottom, and you can do different kinds of processing here. So I'm gonna command click. That's going to lock everything in place, which then allows me to change the value here, and then change the value here. So we can see 15 times 17 is 255. And then I can start adjusting this to be whatever I want. So it does math, it does all kinds of cool stuff. Yeah, almost, as far as I'm aware of, almost all audio processing software is written in C++. To the extent of my knowledge, I'm not a programmer, so there's some outliers, but I'm pretty sure almost everything is in C++. So one important thing to pay attention to when it comes to doing Max programming like this is you'll notice that when I change this number here, it automatically changes the output. When I change this number here, it does not change the output until I change it here. And that has to do with these right here. Let's zoom in even more. Hopefully you can see that one of these has an orange input and one has a blue input. So these are hot and cold inputs. So the cold input, if I change the value, it does not update the process here. Whereas the hot input, as soon as I change the value, it's going to update the output. So not a huge deal. It doesn't often come into play, but it's something that can be kind of useful to at least to know about, because sometimes it might behave kind of strangely. So hot and cold inputs can make a difference there. But yeah, that's kind of like a lot of the basics of just kind of how Max works. So again, if you look at other people's Max devices, you can go in here and you can start to kind of figure out how they made something like this. Like this one, I don't know all the fancy stuff they're doing here, but you can kind of see how they're just using different objects to like kind of put things together. And if there's a letter P first, that means it's a patch inside of a patch. So if you double click on that, you the command click and then double click, this is what's inside of that patch. So they're doing a lot of fancy stuff here that I do not have enough experience coding inside of Live to understand all of it. But you can see here's like, here's the shape of the LFO, and here's the, the jitter and smooth functionality is all built in here. So you can kind of start to dissect it. And again, you can copy and paste ideas out of other people's patches, which is really handy. So if we actually want to like make a patch here, so we actually want to like make something kind of useful, we can make, let's make like a distortion effect. Yeah, it's basically, you can code anything you want. So I've built my own synthesizers. I tried making an FM synthesizer once, and that did not necessarily go super well, but it was a fun learning experience. But say we want to take this and we want to add some like distortion to it. There are probably a number of ways to add distortion as different objects that will do that kind of thing. But I already happen to know what I'm looking for. I happen to know what an object is that does distortion. There's one called degrade. So if I type in DEG, we can see degrade tilde pops up, which it says describes as a signal quality reducer. So if I click on that, this is the degrade tilde object. This is basically going to be a bit crusher / down sampler. And it has 3 inputs and 1 output. The first input, if we mouse over this, is going to be the signal input. The bottom output is going to be the signal output. So audio comes in here, comes out here. The other 2 inputs, one is going to be the sample rate ratio, so it's a downsampler, and the other one over here is going to be the resolution in bits, so it's a bit crusher. So basically these allow you to basically perform the effect, or allows you to control the effect. So to test this out, we're going to delete that guy, move our degrade object in here, take both signals going through there, and then both coming out here. So now I need to control the degrade input. And I can do that with just an integer. Like I just take an integer, send an integer in here, and that will control either the sample rate ratio or resolution in bits. However, because I'm going to be building this for live, I might want to instead use a live.dial. So I'm going to type in n, type in live.dial, and you can see this is just a dial. And if we want to test this out, we could connect this to an integer. This sends a value between 0 and 127. And you can see that just gets outputted here. So a couple things that I need to know about before I start plugging this in. Number 1, I need to know whether these inputs are looking for integers or they're looking for floating points, because that'll totally screw you up. If you try sending a whole number into something that's looking for a decimal point, it doesn't like it. And so when I mouse over this, this is telling me the resolution in bits, it wants an integer. And this one over here, the sample rate ratio wants a floating point. So you gotta watch out for that, because that'll totally screw you up. On top of that, I need to know what the minimum and maximum values are that it's looking for. And I happen to already know because I've done this before, but if I don't know something, there are 2 really great resources for learning max and learning about different objects. If you right click on an object, there is going to be the open degrade reference or the open degrade help, or just whatever the name of the object is. So the reference is going to be more like the traditional manual kind of thing. And this is absolutely mandatory if you're trying to learn Max. So this is going to tell me the name of the object, describe what it does, give me some examples of how it works, and give me all the like boring manual stuff that I need to know about. It also has a reference for like other similar objects. So I can like click on that and it takes me like, here's the downsample object and describes what it does. So that is really, really handy if you're not sure what kind of values you're looking for or what this object actually does. This is like the full manual. There's also really good tutorials in here. If you go like to the home menu, there are tutorials for Max, MSP, Jitter, all this kind of stuff. So if we go to like the Max tutorials, they like go in order, so you can like go through and like build different things, and like here's some stuff on how to like do some things with MIDI, or here's some stuff with data or whatever. So reference menu, really, really helpful. The help menu is also really interesting, and this is separate. This is going to give you a little like description about what it does in a Max patch itself, which is really cool. So it's like you can actually see like how this works, what kind of values go into the degrade, all this kind of stuff like that. You can turn on the audio, and one of the nice things about this is you can unlock this, and because it's a Max patch, that means it's open source, which means I can copy and paste out of the help menu into my own patch. So again, if something is not working, I can just steal an idea from the literal manual and just paste it into whatever I'm working on, and then hopefully it should work. So I happen to already know that if we're going to be doing our resolution in bits, we're going to be using a bit crusher here. It's looking for a whole number, so an integer, between 0 and 24, I'm pretty sure, because you go from 24-bit down. So I'm going to connect this here to here. but the value of my live.dial goes from 0 to 127, which is way too far. Then some of the ones that are made specifically by Ableton, like this LFO one that we looked at, will have some nice comments in there. But most of the ones you find out in the wild are not super helpful in terms of their documentation about it. It's pretty rare, actually. But any of the ones that are like made by Live have at least a little bit of documentation. Oops, wrong button. So I want to make a couple minor changes here to the live.dial before I start using it. Basically, I want to change the range of the values of this dial. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to click on the live.dial. I'm going to go over to the inspector. And I'm going to open this up. And here we can see a list. It probably looks like this for you guys. A list of a couple things in here. I'm going to go ahead and hit the all button. And this is going to give me a list of tons of things that I can edit about this dial, this knob. So I'm going to scroll all the way to the bottom here. And we're going to get things like the long name and the short name. If I'm not mistaken, the long name, I'm going to call this BC for Bit Crusher. The long name is the name that is referenced in the actual code, and the short name is what it actually displays. So if I change the short name to be Bit Crusher, it changes the name over here to be BC for Bit Crusher. So you can change those if you want to. We can choose whether we want a floating point, an integer, or an enum. So we're looking for an integer, and we're looking for a range between 1 and 24. So I'm going to type in 1, type in space, and do 24. So now the minimum and maximum range on my Bit Crusher knob goes from 1 to 24. We can also do things like set an initialized value, set the unit style to be whatever you want. There's tons of things you can customize here, but for right now, all I'm doing is making sure that the type is set to the type I need, either floating point or integer, and the range is set from the range that I want, in this case, 1 to 24, which I knew because I looked at the manual. So we're good to go here. So this should be working. So I'm going to hold down Command. I'm going to click that. I'm going to hit play. If this is at 24, there should be no bit crushing going on. It should sound normal. But if I start turning this down, you can hear bit crushing. You can adjust the volume here. There, that's how it works. So we got that working. Sounds good. And then we're going to do the same kind of thing. Yeah, if you want to get into like, so first off, if you want to make money in the music industry right now, plugin design is like, there's money there right now. People will spend a lot of money on plugins. Like Steve Duda, as was mentioned by Emo in the chat, like that dude's sitting pretty because all that serum money is going right to him. So if you have some coding background and are interested in this kind of stuff, there's a market for it if you can come up with cool, interesting, unique ideas. And this is a great place to get started if you're interested in kind of figuring out more about kind of like signal processing and how it works with audio. All right, so we got the first part of our distortion working. We have our bit crusher. The other part is going to be the downsampler. So we're going to go in here and in this case, we are going to be doing the same thing, but we're going to be looking for a number between a decimal point between 0 and 1. I guess technically 0.01 and 1. So we're going to, once again, hit N for new, type in live.dial. We're going to go over to the inspector. If you don't see it, hit the little I button right here. We're going to scroll down to the bottom. We're going to change the long name to be DS for downsampler. The short name to also be DS for downsampler. The type is going to be a floating point, and we're looking for a number, like I said, between 0.01 and 1. And again, make sure there's decimal points here because it's going to make your life a lot easier in terms of how things work. And then down here within our unit style, we also want this to be a floating point. So now we can set the initialized value to be 1. So now we're going from, again, decimal points from 0.01 up to 1. We're going to connect this guy over here, the output going into the input over here. Now, if I hit Command click to lock it, I'm going to hit play and then turn this down, and we should get a downsampler. And we can combine the two of them together to get different kinds of weird distortion. Like that. So that's the basic concept here. We just made a max patch, a working, living max patch. Just using plugin, going into degrade, to live.dials to control the other inputs, to control the amount of distortion we're getting, going into a volume control, and then coming right back out to live. That's the whole thing. However, first off, I'm going to save this guy. And when I exit here and go into live, it looks like this. It looks ugly. It does. I can see all this weird stuff that doesn't look the way I want. So it'll still work, actually. If I hit play now, I can still control that, but it doesn't look the way I want it to look. So the last thing we need to do after we build our patch is tidy this thing up and put it into presentation mode. And there's a couple step process to this. The first step is going to picking out which objects you want to see. Like, we don't need to see these guys, and we don't need to see these guys. So I'm going to select this guy, hold down Shift, select those two. So Emo's asking if impulse response or frequency responses are available to be inserted into something for emulation. You can definitely do impulse stuff inside of Max. I've never tried it personally myself, so I don't know exactly how that works. But I mean, convolution reverb is a Max patch, so you can definitely do that kind of processing. I'm assuming you're talking about like how you do that kind of thing for Max processing. Not entirely sure off the top of my head, but I definitely know you can do that. So I'm going to go ahead and right-click on these guys and hit Add to Presentation, which puts it's a little hard to see. Let me zoom back in. We got a little like red-ish box around them. So now when I hit this button down here, puts it in presentation mode. And we can move these independently. So we'll actually do this, and this, and it looks like that. So when I exit presentation mode back to patching mode, we can see everything still lives where it lives. When I go to presentation mode, it looks clean and pretty and the way we want it to look, like that. So here's the last thing you need to do in order to actually make this work. And people always forget about this, is we need this to open in presentation mode. So to do that, we're going to hit the inspector button over on the right side. And if you have an object selected like this, click into empty space. So if you put empty space like that, you get a little P with a diamond around it. This opens the patcher for the inspector for the entire patch. So again, lets you control things like background color and all that kind of stuff. We're going to scroll all the way to the bottom, and we're going to hit this open in presentation mode. And check that box. Now when I hit the save button, over inside of live, we now have an effect with all of the things that I want, all in one place, and a volume control built into it. So that's kind of the last step, is just hit the inspector, hit the little P button up here. If you don't see it, make sure you click into empty space, scroll down to the bottom, hit open presentation, and then save it. And then there's your first Max patch that you made. So yeah, any questions about how to do that? So Ema's asking about put piano noise in a specific room. You could add that effect and pick an Ableton desired reverb for your module. Yeah, you could do all that inside of yeah, you do all that inside of Max. Is like figure out how they do that convolution stuff. Like we can we can look at the actual convolution reverb and see how that works a little bit. So if we go in here, go to Max Audio Effects, convolution reverb, hit this little guy right here. Open this up. Oops. Yeah, so there's a whole impulse response patcher built in here that is a little bit beyond my skill level. But again, you can see like here's like a little EQ, here's the volume coming in, here's the processing. Okay, so here's a bunch of the processing for the impulse response. Seems pretty complicated. Yeah, go forth and make some cool Max patches and send them to me once you do make them. I would also, I think I mentioned this earlier, but check out maxforlive.com. It's a website that has literally like 4,000 plus, maybe even 5,000 Max patches that people just made and released for free. So everything is on there if you want like some cool weird stuff. There's tons of cool things you can do with it. It's literally like, if you can imagine it, you can do it with Max. Also check out the Max video processing video that I did a little while back on the channel. I'm sure most of you guys have seen that, but that'll help kind of build on top of some of the stuff we talked about right here. I might even kind of clip this from this video and upload this as a separate video on the channel, because I feel like that was a pretty, that's the kind of thing that people want to know about, is like where to get started with Max patching, because it's pretty intimidating at first. There's like a huge learning curve just to kind of like get to this point. But the cool thing about learning Max programming is that the grammar of Max coding is pretty easy. It's just, you just drag cables from one to another. It's the vocabulary and knowing which object to use at which time and which is the right object for the task you have at hand. That's the part that like takes a lot of knowledge and research and spending some time with it. Other quick thing to mention about Max coding that's kind of useful is when you see these cables, some of them are black and green and some are just gray. The black and green cables carry a signal. So it's either audio or video, usually. And the gray cables are just usually numbers. So as you connect things together, you might notice that you get certain kinds of cables coming in and out, and that's the difference between those two. Wait, any questions about Max programming? Yeah, that would be tricky to do like synth emulation with this. There's lots of really cool Max MIDI plugins. A lot of cool like stuff you can do with sequencing. That's pretty awesome. One thing I will point out when it comes to like taking MIDI, for example, anything that's gonna have like MIDI going into it, you're gonna have a MIDI, what is it, MIDI from or something like that? Or MIDI in? Yeah, so you're gonna have a MIDI in object. It's pretty straightforward. And then a MIDI signal actually contains a lot of different information. It contains things like MIDI channel, CCs, note numbers, pitch, all that kind of stuff, right? So if you have a MIDI in, you're going to want to run that through a MIDI parse. So this will basically take your MIDI signal and split it out into all of the different parts. So this first output will be note on and off. It includes pitch and velocity. This one is polyphonic key pressure. This one's CC changes. This one's program changes, aftertouch, pitch bend, MIDI channel, and MIDI event message. So you can like take a MIDI signal and divide it into its various parts, and then you can use different parts, things like velocity, for example, to control specific things inside your max patch. Yeah, Thomas, thanks for popping by. Appreciate it. Definitely come back again. I am usually streaming here on Tuesday, what's my afternoon, I guess night for you, and then Fridays I do a song feedback stream if you want to come check it out again. Nice. I'm glad there's so many programmers in here, because talking about live is a lot easier when people have a little bit of like programming background. Sweet. Yeah. Any other questions about Max coding, getting started? There are also probably a lot of other channels out there. I mean, there are definitely a lot of other channels where people will kind of do what I just did, where they will kind of like build a patch from scratch, and then you can kind of follow along and then kind of like learn how other people build things. Thomas, I think the link is in the video description. If not, it should be in any one of the other video descriptions I have on the channel. Sweet. Well, we got a little bit of time left on the stream. If anybody has any other topics or questions or things that they want to go over, now would be the time to do it. Also, I do want to let you guys know I will probably not be here on Friday for the Friday feedback stream this week, unfortunately. I apologize about that. I have my first post-COVID gig this weekend at a festival, so I will be gone, I think, the entire weekend. Yeah, there's a lot of really cool packs that have Max for Live devices in them if you want to kind of like get familiar with them. I mentioned them earlier, but the probability pack is really useful. The Max for Live Essentials, anything that starts with M4L being a Max for Live pack. There's a few others. I mean, Convolution Reverb is a classic one. There's also things like Bengal. So this is one you have to purchase off of the Ableton website. But this is probably the most intense max patch I've ever seen. It's like it's like Operator, but better. It's like a third-party plugin, basically, and this is built all in Max. So if you wanted to, you could open this up, and I'm not going to do it right now because I'm scared it'll crash my computer while I'm streaming, but you can open this up and like dig underneath the hood of this synth and see everything that it can do and steal some ideas or figure some things out. This is made by a company called Max for Cats, who makes a bunch of really cool, interesting, weird Mac stuff. They also have, what's it called? Like a semi-modular kind of thing they do. What is it called? It's not that one. Why am I blanking on the name? But they basically do like a modular, they built a modular synthesizer-esque kind of thing that's all inside of Max. Ensemble? Maybe it's this one. Nope, not that one. Here's another like Max synth they made. I'm sure I'll remember the name in a minute. Ocelot. Yeah, so here's Ocelot. It starts off as an empty screen, and you have a bunch of basically modular things you can build with it. So here's like a morphing oscillator one, and this, I think it sends and receives CV. Like here's a sequencer, and you can connect them all together to like create your own patches that way. I haven't spent a lot of time with this because I have my own actual modular synthesizer, but this is really cool and definitely worth checking out if you have access to it. And especially if you're like interested in modular synthesizer kind of stuff. What's up, Josh? How you doing today? Yeah, I definitely need to spend more time with this. Got a VCA, it's got distortion, it's got built-in effects, it's got a lot of effects, got a bunch of sequencers, some logic controls. Yeah, this thing's pretty cool. So the Max for Cat stuff is always really impressive in terms of like Max coding and what you can do with it. Well, Josh, you just missed a whole Max intro to Max for live programming. Nice. Do you get the new one, the updated version, or are you using the old version of the Euclidean sequencer? I saw that they updated it, but I have not gotten the new version yet. I need to. Yeah, Mr. Starbeast, you can definitely route audio and visuals into one Max device for sure. The question would be if the AV recorder, I mean, as soon as AV is audio and video, that it should record both at the same time. Yeah, the new one looks super cool. So the Euclidean sequencer, if anybody wants to know what one of my favorite Max for Live devices is the, do I have it in my favorites? Yeah, this guy. I show it off on stream all the time just because people ask me about some of my favorite devices, but this thing is an absolute beast of a sequencer. Amazing for percussion. You can do really great melodic stuff with it. Just hands down one of the best sequencers out there. And then I don't know what features they've added with the new version, but I think they've added quite a few things. Yeah, it's just such a good device to have around. Cool. Well, I appreciate you guys all coming by for the stream today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Like I said, I will not be around on Friday, but I will definitely be back next Tuesday. for another one of these kind of hangout streams. If you guys want to do some more max coding, we can make a synthesizer together if you guys really want. Or otherwise, have some fun this weekend. For those of you in America, have a good holiday. I am going to try to make the sample pack for the sample pack challenge some point tomorrow, and then try to release that on Thursday. So if you guys enjoyed the last sample pack challenge, another one's coming real soon. I just need to crank out a bunch of samples tomorrow and see how that goes. But I will be posting a video on that, as well as releasing a little video kind of like we did before. Yeah, I also need to do a lot of prepping for my gig this weekend. I'm actually playing two-hour sets, so it's going to be a lot of DJing. So I just got to organize a lot of songs and find a bunch of new songs. But should be fun. I'm really excited about it. Haven't played a show since pre-COVID, so it'll be a lot of fun. But yeah, again, thank you to everybody out there who showed up. And if you are not yet subscribed, go ahead and do so. If you already subscribed, you are amazing. And if you want to help out the channel, go ahead and hit the like button or any of the other stuff. Feed the algorithm, whatever you need to do to help share my stuff to YouTube. That would be really helpful and very appreciated. But yeah, I'll see you guys back here in about a week, and have a good weekend.